Hey guys, today I'm going to be covering the whole of Tsardom and communism. So, who was the Tsar? Tsar was an autocratic ruler. Autocratic means he has supreme control, sole power is not shared. How was society like? And Russia itself. Russia itself was very big. There were so many nationalities. It was impossible to govern because they spoke different languages. They had different religions, and the Tsar obviously was based in Moscow. So he some places around Russia felt dejected and isolated. Worse compromised of Tsar's rule, where we had the Mir or Korana, which was his secret police, and there's the Metsvar, which was the local council. As you know, Russia already had a lot of censorship over media, arts, and paintings and television, as well as like radio and books. And society, well, people didn't have the basic education, there was poverty and lack of basic needs, so famine was very common, food shortages. 80% of society were peasants, whereas I think it was 1.25% were the aristocracy, but they owned 25% of land, despite being such a small fraction. And the aristocracy, they started selling their land piece by piece because they knew that the peasants were going to start revolting one day. So they started selling their land piece by piece in fear. What did Russian society have? Well, we had no trade unions, machinery was very dangerous, there was child labour, no regulations. Kulaks were the rich peasants, and so they owned most of the land, and they basically thrived off it more than the normal peasants. Opposition consisted of three groups. We had the cadets and the liberals. These are mainly the middle class. They wanted reform, so reform means change rather than revolution, which means fighting to get that change. So we had reforms, and then the second group was the revolutionaries. Social revolutionaries, they wanted revolution and rebellion, and they were willing to get the land from the nobles and hand it over to the peasants. Then we had the third group. Oh, and the social revolutionaries, they also had very radical ideas. Very radical. And the third group was the social democratic party. The social democrats were comprised of two groups, Mensheviks and Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks were, and they both followed the ideas of Karl Marx, who wanted communism, so the idea of equality, everyone earning the same thing, etc. And it was split into two groups of Mensheviks and Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks were led by Lenin. They felt Russia was ready for revolution. Mensheviks thought Russia was not ready for revolution. That was the only two difference, but other than that, they just wanted communism. They wanted the same things. What were the benefits of the Tsar's court? Well, he was a loyal, he was a family man, he paid attention to detail. That was his vice though, because it led to his downfall. Because the fact that he paid attention to such small detail meant he let influential people like Rasputin or Count White or Stolypin take decisions for him. And that's not what a good monarch is meant to do. So he let other people take decisions for him, and he encouraged rivalry between ministers by having meetings one-to-one. So they started going very, they started having radical ideas, and they started opposing each other. In 1905, there were two causes to the 1905 revolution. We had Bloody Sunday and Battle of Potemkin, or the Mutiny of Potemkin. And in the Mutiny of Potemkin, we had strikes held for the striking workers, and they turned into rebellions. And on Bloody Sunday, Father Gapon, he led a peaceful protest. It was actually really peaceful. They had pictures of the Tsar, candles, people were singing, and they were going to the Winter Palace. And the troops, they panicked, and they open fired, and this became known as Bloody Sunday. To save himself, the Tsar set up the October Manifesto. In the October Manifesto, it comprised of free political speech, so the right to free speech, and political party formations, as well as setting up the Duma, which the Tsar ignored completely anyway, so it didn't really help, and people already had free speech, and they were allowed to form political parties anyway. So this gave them temporary content, and this led to them becoming divided. The peasants became divided and not united, and this was easy for the Tsar to crush them. Stolypin's reforms, so 1906, Stolypin became Prime Minister of Russia. His Carrot was the fact that he let kulaks opt to the mir, asked for more land. This created larger, efficient farms, allowing them to grow more crops, increasing agricultural production. And it did rise. Industry and agriculture did rise under Stolypin's control, and the stick was his crushing of opposition. Stolypin's necktie was also known as the noose, because he obviously punished so many people. And he also had reforms for like basic education, trade union formation, and plans for like basic education of workers, and safety regulations for them too. However, he was assassinated, but the Tsar was going to sack him anyway for trying to change Russia too much. This showed how backward the society were. They weren't going to take new changes. They just wanted to keep things how they were. World War One. So, 1914, Russia entered World War One against Japan, and there was a lot of patriotism in the beginning. People were ready to fight for their country, lots of loyalty towards the Tsar. But then the Tsar took control. Russia started losing because they had no ammunition. They had no ammunition, no equipment, no resources, badly led by the Tsar. So he was responsible for the losses, and they were losing. And the impacts include the fact that the people like in the countryside, so women and orphans, they didn't receive the pensions. The 13 million conscription of the soldiers meant the livelihoods of the aristocracy were threatened because they had no people to work on the land. As well as the fact that the railway lines couldn't keep up with the food demands, so there were lots of food shortages. The requisition parties came to take food. There wasn't enough. It was just chaotic. And he also left the Tsarina in charge. The Tsarina was German, and she was rumoured to have an affair with Rasputin. So again, this didn't help his reputation. The Tsar's abdication. So the Tsar abdicated in 1917. So on the 7th of March, it was International Women's Day. The Petrograd Soviets and the women were marching. And on the 15th of March, the Tsar was called to step down, and his brother didn't want to take the throne either. So then the Roman dynasty had ended, and Russia had enough of the Tsars. They were looking for a new leader now. So now we're going to 3.2, Lenin's Russia and Lenin's New Society. So who exactly was Lenin? Lenin was the leader of the Bolsheviks. He had lots of decrees. For example, he wanted to limit the working day to 8 hours. He wanted to make marriage and divorce easier, so without the influence of the church as well. He also wanted